Hello, everyone. Welcome to the graduate student panel. I have the honor to be your host this afternoon. Feel free to send questions in the Q&A. Thank you so much, Dr. Peter Krypton. Round of applause virtually. I guess people can't hear the claps, but you can do the soundless claps. Yeah, so I'm your friendly neighborhood fizzer. I did some work with UBC Best. I did not know you were going to show slides with my face on it. But anywho, I've been bioengineering adjacent through my time at UBC. I think anyone in this event enjoys and appreciates this field. Not all of us can be specifically in explicit bioengineering training, but that doesn't mean we can't bring a lot of power into it since it is so interdisciplinary. So with that being said, I would like to welcome the three amazing panelists, Laura Stankowick. I'm sorry, I butchered that for sure, but Laura Stankowick, Jeannie Malone, and Emma Jameson. Would you like to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your work and your journey?
I can go first, if that's okay. Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Laura, and I am currently a PhD student here at UBC. I did my undergrad at Queen's University in chemical engineering, kind of with a focus of biochemical engineering. They don't have a biomedical specific program there. And then I did a research work term in the summer between third and fourth year and a thesis project in fourth year, and really just fell in love with research and kind of the flexibility it gives you and the fact that you're kind of choosing your own path and learning about whatever you're interested if you find the right supervisor, and decided that I really wanted to move to Vancouver and reached out to some profs here with some research that I thought was pretty interesting. And lo and behold, I'm here a year later starting my PhD. I'll leave that as my intro. Jeannie, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So hi folks, my name is Jeannie. I use she, her pronouns. I graduated from UBC's electrical engineering program in 2017 with the biomed option, which I kind of viewed as a biomed minor and an electrical engineering major. And I knew that this was the field I was interested in, but I didn't feel like my undergrad gave me sort of enough biomed. And at the time, the biomed undergrad program at UBC wasn't an option for me. I had done some work over the summer in a research lab at St. Michael's Hospital, so I had sort of a sense of what research was, and I knew that I wasn't really quite done with school yet. So in the fall of 2017, I joined UBC's biomedical engineering program as a master's student, and then transitioned into the PhD program, where I'm a PhD candidate now. I'll pass that over to you, Emma.
Yeah, so my name is Emma, and I'm a recent graduate of the McGill Bioengineering undergraduate program. I'm currently a first-year medical student at Western, and throughout my years in my undergrad, I've kind of tried a bunch of different things. So I did research at U of T within their bioengineering department for 2 years, kind of working in tissue engineering. And then I've also had a little bit of biotech industry exposure by working with a company called Hyacinth back in Montreal. So yeah, I've tried a couple different things, but overall, I just kind of wanted to tie in engineering and medicine in a clinical kind of approach.
Wonderful. So I will start with some questions since there haven't been any audience questions yet. So first of all, since bioengineering is such an in-between field, what are some of the challenges and some of the solutions in navigating a space where if you were to get all of the base training, you would be in school for decades and decades?
Maybe I can start. I would say I definitely feel like my core background is in electrical engineering and is in sort of that fundamental basic understanding of sort of electromagnetism circuits, all those sorts of things. And I often feel out of my depth with some of the cell bio stuff. Those are areas where I'm constantly learning. And I found that attending seminars, listening, sort of making a constant list of words you don't know and Googling them afterwards. Those types of things sort of like build your foundation. And I do think that one of the things about UBC's biomed grad program that is really good is that you do get exposure to sort of all of these different ranges of the field. But my personal work focuses a lot more on the areas that I feel stronger in.
I can kind of continue on that a little bit. So I found, at least with like my degree, it was very much like they teach you a little bit about everything. So you don't really feel like a subject matter expert in any field. But I think what's more important is that you just pursue the opportunities that interest you, whether that be research, where you'll learn a lot more about that specific topic, or like going into industry, because like school won't teach you everything, especially in engineering, but just identifying those fields I think is really crucial.
I think that's a great point of just like going into research and then finding something to narrow down at. Like for me, that's something I think I'm still struggling with. I feel like a lot of people, you like get that taste of everything in your undergrad and you're like, oh, this is also interesting. And like, I see how it contributes. You have like environmental sides and like biomedical sides. And I think that just, that's like, I agree, finding a research program that you think is really cool doesn't mean that you can shut off all the other parts of your brain and not think about those and talk about them with your friends. But focusing is hard. And I tried to like postpone that as late as possible and try and keep that mindset. But I think that once you find something that you're really interested in, you'll just go down a pathway that you won't want to turn around from.
That's wonderful. We have a couple questions for Emma, specifically related to med school. First off, how did it feel doing the application process and the beginning of med school with an engineering background? And also, what's it like to flex so hard?
So the application process, it's a bit daunting, I have to say. Luckily, a lot of Canadian medical schools don't really have too many prerequisites now. So as an engineering student, it's not too difficult to maybe take a couple extra here and there, depending on the school. I guess to kind of answer about like how it is transitioning, medical school is definitely very different than engineering, but there are similarities in like how you approach things. So it's definitely more focused on like problem solving with cases and kind of identifying how things go wrong. So it's a similar approach to engineering, but there's definitely a lot more bio, but they catch you up. So it's not an impossible transition. If anything, I find it a lot easier than engineering. And it's very doable. There's a lot of engineers in my class.
Wonderful. There are a couple more questions related to what opportunities can people do to stay involved with the field, even if they can't participate in it directly? Also, they said you all are really inspiring to them, which I just had to pass along.
Is that question directed towards anyone or just like free for all?
It was free for all.
Could you repeat the question?
Absolutely. So for some people who can't, who are graduate students or undergrads or kind of related to the space or interested in it, but can't be in it directly, what are some of the ways for people to get involved or learn more about it or volunteer with it?
I can kind of talk about that for a sec. Like most of us are still working from home as well. Like I do go into the lab now to do experiments, but like half of my lab are strictly computational people and the other half are kind of realizing that you can do a lot of work from home. And so not being there in the lab specifically doesn't necessarily need to be the limiting factor. Like, especially like when you're a new graduate student. So if you're a new undergrad coming in and helping, a lot of it's like reading and thinking what's going on in the literature and kind of like, especially from an engineering perspective, like it's all modeling of that. So you can take other people's data and like try and figure out new questions from it or just be learning software. But I don't think that working from home necessarily needs to mean that you can't reach out and still look for research opportunities.
It's true, there are a lot of like bioinformatics workshops and everything online for people to get involved and learn about it. Yeah.
I would echo like the concept that, say, if you're studying, I don't know, mechanical engineering or engineering physics or something, there's still tons of touch points, and there's lots of seminars and opportunities that are sort of open within the university community. I mean, UBC has what it feels like a seminar like every 3 hours on something, and I'm sure McGill is the same, especially in the online world where you can just hop on a Zoom and learn something new.
Thank you so much. Let's dig in a little more on what you're actually doing in your graduate studies and research, or I guess in Emma's case, med school. I don't know if you're doing research with med school, it seemed like it. So can we talk a little bit about what you're actually studying or investigating, some things that are really exciting and fun about it, and some things that have been challenging or harder about it?
Maybe I'll give that one a shot. So my work is in cancer research, so that's a very wide field, but my particular thesis work is in trying to find early signs of ovarian cancer in the fallopian tubes. So our lab has developed over a number of years an imaging device, which is essentially a catheter, which can do a couple different types of imaging. And my work is to both sort of improve that device and validate whether it would be potential to image the fallopian tubes to see if we can find some of those early lesions before cancer progresses. So that's my particular niche area. Things that are really cool about my work is I get to work with all sorts of different people from different backgrounds. We have pathologists, statisticians, physicists, pure biologists, there's like clinicians, there's a whole gamut of people who I get to interact with. And I would say the downsides is that can sometimes mean things are slow. And my work is in clinical studies. So right now, everything is a little bit more up in the air than it used to be, since getting access to the hospital and being there is a little bit more lower down on the priority list these days. But I would say it's exciting, it's high impact, and there's a great community out at BC Cancer.
I can go next. That's okay. So I'm looking at T cell development in the thymus. So T cells are the cells that are like your head of your immune system. So they are the ones that detect bacteria and pathogens and also detect cancer cells. And the thymus is an organ where they develop and they learn like what's a good cell and what's a bad cell. So what I'm doing is I'm using these new technologies that allow us to kind of look in more detail at what's happening in the thymus. And specifically, they're like spatial technology. So you can see where cells are in relation to each other and try and figure out how they're communicating with a little bit more detail than we used to be able to. And the big picture aim of this is to be able to make T cells in the lab that can be used as a cancer therapeutic, because T cells kill cancer cells and you can make them really specific to kill specific types of cancer. And this technology is already available in the States and in Canada, I think already, especially in Toronto, but it's really expensive. So the goal of my research is to make that a lot more accessible and cheaper, so the Canadian healthcare system can support it.
Could you say something that's fun and exciting, or something? Oh, I guess you did say something fun and exciting, which was everything. But could you say something that's been challenging about this work?
Oh, I almost said, never mind. Yeah, for sure. So the technology I'm using is called CUBEC, and it's super cool because it's the only one in Canada. But it's also really frustrating because it's the only one in Canada and it's just me trying to figure it out. So it makes it extremely slow when there's only like one guy in Stanford that I can talk to over Zoom, which doesn't actually matter anymore. But yeah, knowing that like you have people that kind of know what you're talking about, but no one is the expert because you're technically the expert is kind of frustrating as an incoming student.
I guess I just kind of chime in. So right now I'm not really doing research, but in the past I did kind of work with cardiovascular research, but like looking at how to promote angiogenesis to kind of like regrow blood vessels in like a 3D model, as well as like trying to model glioblastoma in a hydrogel model at another lab. So like I found those things really, really interesting because like you could see the direct implications. Sure, it's not at a clinical level yet, but just kind of better understanding those conditions and kind of the pathology behind it was really fascinating to me. But now that I am in medical school, I'm not doing a PhD, but there is like a 4-year research course. My project hasn't been decided yet, but I know a lot of med students go many different ways. Some of them go more into biophysics. I have a friend doing an MDPhD in that. Other people go more into like sports related injuries or like more molecular studies, genetics. So it's really endless and it depends on what you're interested in.
That's awesome. I am so blown away. Thank you so much for all the incredible work and for sharing it here with us. Laura, specifically related to your work so far, can you talk a little more about the leadership component of doing such groundbreaking work, or the fact that there isn't that many people that you can rely upon?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can actually see this question in the chat, so I might just look at it. But I think that one major component is trying to communicate what you're doing when no one else is doing it. And especially in science, like no matter what you're talking about, we're already in such small niches that talking between my other biomedical friends who are like in Peter Crichton's lab and doing hip fracture research, it's hard to like communicate what you're doing with them. So trying to find a common language so you can talk about what you're doing and make other people excited about it is pretty vital for your research actually making any kind of impact. And so I think that just like good science communication skills are what I've been trying to pursue.
Beyond directly your work, but also like conferences and things, what do you mean?
Yeah, so like even talking to like different scientific communities, like having it's different because you have to really know what your audience is so that you can communicate to their level and so that you don't feel like anyone's being missed. So conferences for sure, I've just been trying to present posters, and like if you talked to me 4 years ago, I would never be talking in front of people, but I kind of realized how important it is to like get your research out there and just practice those skills. So just not enjoying it, but making yourself do it anyways sometimes is pretty important. And then one thing specifically that I have done a few times this year is participate in 3-minute thesis competitions, which is explaining your research to a lay community so that they can kind of just know what's out there. And I think this is super valuable because I, as a 4th-year biochemical engineering undergrad, had no idea any of this research was going on, which I think is kind of sad. And so just trying to communicate your research, I like to say it to like my 12-year-old cousin. If they can understand what I'm saying, then that's a good 3-minute thesis level. I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. Jeannie, during undergrad, you were very involved in the UBC community and leadership. It was kind of impossible to be an engineering student and not know about you and not be affected by your work. What's it been like in transition to grad school? Is that still something you participate in? Has been hard to let it go? And also, can you talk a bit about the responsibility of doing such patient-centric work and patient-centric design? Because if you do the research that you do, you can really be changing the way that a technology is applied to people. How do you deal with that responsibility?
Yeah, so sort of 2 directions there. So yes, for the folks here who are from UBC, you probably have seen my face on a poster before. I have done student government elections. It has happened several times. I would say in undergrad, I was really involved in both the EUS as well as Gearing Up, which is our faculty's outreach program. And then in grad school, I tried to sort of take that piece and then look at university-wide pieces. So I sat on the Senate for a year. I'm currently serving on the Board of Governors for the 4th time, I think. And I think those, from my perspective, give me a great perspective on the way a university works, which is something that I'm intrinsically interested in. Governance is my thing. But it also has been such a great opportunity to talk to and meet students and to be an advocate on a wide swath of issues, to work with our alma mater society, which is our student union, on all sorts of student advocacy. From next Friday, I have a presentation coming on food insecurity, which has been a huge challenge in the pandemic for a number of people, to the committee that I chair within the board, and that through tuition increases, through all sorts of different things. However, I think I have reached the stage at which I need to focus on my research more because it is a huge time suck. But anyone who has been involved in any sort of organization, I mean, from the biomed student associations here today to undergrad societies to clubs, you all know what crazy skill sets you can build from that, as well as how much you can give back. And those are just sort of core volunteering pieces who are part of who I am, and I think they're part of many of the folks here today. In terms of patient care and sort of patient input into design, I think where we're at right now is pretty high level conceptually. Does this work to treat this possible disease or to identify it? However, it's definitely something that is core to integrating something into getting it out there, past just sort of the basic like pilot, does this thing do what we expect it to? We're in collaboration with a number of sort of the gynecologists out at VGH, and there's a huge cluster called the Gynecology Cancer Initiative, which has a ton of patient input into all of the various sort of research endeavors. So I think there's opportunity to leverage it going further. I don't know whether that will be in scope of my particular thesis, but we'll see where that lands.
That's fantastic. Emma, I guess I've let you coast for too long. A lot of people are asking about if the engineering degree has prepared you for med school. I guess in your case, it was a bioengineering degree, so it has a lot more biology, but also whether or not you consider doing an MDPhD.
Yeah, so I would say that at least the McGill bioengineering program, it kind of prepared me. I think I did learn a lot of stuff through doing the MCAT, because there was things that like we didn't take, like physiology, so that I kind of learned on my own. But once again, like med school, they're really there to support you. It's very different than engineering, where they want everyone to pass and they'll give you all the resources you need to kind of get through. And even one of my friends from UBC, biochemical engineering, I think he did there, he's doing his MD PhD now at Western, and he said that he had a bit of a weaker biology background, but he feels that the school is providing enough for us to still like do well. I think there was a second part of the question that I forget now.
Someone also asked about doing an MD PhD.
Okay, yeah, so I definitely considered grad school at the end of my undergrad. I do enjoy research, and it was something that I was looking into, especially at U of T, maybe doing like a PhD with one of the labs I used to work at. But what it came down to is that I didn't really see myself loving a project that I could do for an extended period of time. And I wasn't so interested in being a clinician scientist. I kind of just wanted to pursue clinical work, and who knows, maybe down the line I'll do a master's during residency, which a lot of people do. But I just didn't really see myself shooting for that because it's not really what I wanted at the end. My friends that did go into it, they have very different goals than me. So it is a certain type of person, but if you really do love research and you want that clinical exposure too, MD PhD all the way.
That brings, thank you so much. That brings such an excellent question, which is, what are your goals? What are you trying to reach for career-wise? And how does, in the case of Jeannie and Laura, grad school, and the case of Emma, med school, send you in that direction?
I guess I can just quickly continue then. So as of now, I really don't know what kind of doctor I want to be. A lot of first-year med students don't know, but I'm definitely leaning towards internal med because it takes a very similar approach to engineering in that it's very problem-solving based, investigation based, with all kinds of interesting cases, whether you go into oncology, cardiology, that kind of thing. But that's subject to change, like not too sure.
Internal med is so high stakes all the time. You have so many choices to make in such a short time, and if you make any of them wrong, the person dies. Anywho.
I think my intention is to go into academia, so I think that the PhD is sort of generally one of those requirements. So ideally, I want to be a prof, and I think what I've tried to do during grad school through both like my research, I've held a number of TA-ships. Through some of that student government stuff, I've tried to build sort of the skill sets that I think I would need in terms of the teaching service research pieces. Maybe got to focus a little bit more on research next, but we'll sort of build that fundamental piece there.
I find this is a hard question because I don't totally know. And I kind of am taking this opportunity to learn a little bit about academia and industry because I'm not sure at the moment. I also think that like the mesh of the two, which is like usually entrepreneurship and like using your research and commercializing it is really interesting, but that depends on you having some cool revelation in science. At the moment, I kind of just am using this opportunity to like learn a little bit more about research, hopefully do an internship in a field that I'm actually interested in. The ones that I did during my undergrad were like really unrelated to anything that I wanted to do, and use that to kind of structure my next steps going forward. But if you ask me what I think I'll be doing, my next step is probably a postdoc, hopefully overseas, and then coming back to Canada to probably work in academia if that's a possibility.
Canada will be lucky to have you. Emma, could you talk a little bit more about your industry experience? It seems to be, a lot of people seem to be curious about what that space is like.
Yeah, so it's a little limited. I did work with Hyacinth last year, so it was like my capstone engineering project where we were just paired up with that company, and it's definitely very different. It's still a lot of wet lab research, but the approach they take is completely different than let's say like a research lab. There's a lot more focus on getting things done pretty quickly and finding things that work regardless of how it'll look in the scientific paper. So it's really just like a shift of priorities, but it's definitely an interesting space. And one thing I did notice is that most people in that company and most people in that industry tend to have graduate degrees in like relevant areas. So I think as an undergrad, I didn't really have necessarily all the knowledge I needed for it, but having a background in some summer research things definitely helped a lot.
That's awesome. And just to confirm, someone asked, what is internal medicine?
Okay, so internal med is kind of like a very, very broad field of medicine. So it encompasses, like, if you go see a cardiologist, they're an internal med doctor, a GI doc, oncologist, hematologist, like arthritis doctors, they're all internal med, but essentially you do like an internal med residency, which is focused on pretty much all the systems. So you kind of have to be aware of everything. And then after that, you apply for like a subspecialty, whether that be like cardiology or something else.
So if it's all the things that are inside the body, isn't that everything?
Pretty much, it's big.
So we've talked about like the big highbrow dreams stuff. So let's talk a little bit about the minutia for people trying to make their way in this space. So what is the process like to finding a supervisor, cold emailing people? Any tips on how to do it respectively, and any tips on how to feel the audacity to do it?
Maybe I can start. Yeah, so I cold emailed a bunch of people. I would say like the number one thing is always just like read their website, because often profs who are particularly popular will have a lot of rules that they wish you to follow, or they might not be taking grad students, or they might be advertising positions, or they might be looking for people with specific skills. From my experience, was pretty much like any job where you send a cover letter and maybe your transcript and you say, hello, I would like to talk to you, please. And then from that process, I talked to a couple different people. I toured a couple different labs. I talked to the grad students of the PIs, which I think is really, really important to try and get a sense of like what it is actually like, because they'll be able to tell you all of the things that are happening and all of the sort of real stories behind the nice facade. And I think it's always good to touch base and understand like what level of support you'd be able to get from a particular supervisor, whether you want to pull in a co-supervisor, whether you have like a project in mind or not. From my perspective, I had no specific field I was interested in. I was just like, I would like to do a graduate school. I'm going to talk to all these people. All of these things are vaguely interesting to me. And I read a couple publications from each person and sort of did a little bit of digging, and went from there.
I love how that also incorporates a process of discovery of what you're interested in the process of trying to get a foot in the door. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add. I did a very similar thing where I just like sat down and was like, where do I want to live? Okay, probably want to live in Vancouver or at a few other places, but mostly just looking in Vancouver, and kind of like opened up the BMEG page and was like, these are all the professors, and then went to their websites, read their websites to determine like if their research was vaguely interesting to me, and then sent out like 40 emails. And you just got to like have a kind of a template and then write a few like specific things about their lab, about why you're interested in it, kind of similar to a cover letter, and attach my resume, and got a few responses. I'm going to really echo what Jeannie said about talking to the grad students in their lab if you can. Like that's how you'll learn if you actually want to work there, because you're going to be there for like 4 to 7 years or 2 years if you're doing a master's. And like that's going to be your family and your colleagues and your support system. So you really want to know, like, are these my people? And just be really upfront. Like the grad students are pretty used to like students asking them about the culture. And so ask your questions, like don't be afraid, this is your time.
That's wonderful. I guess it's like the great philosopher Lady Gaga said, there can be 100 people in the room and you just need one to believe in you. Oh wait, we can't have 100 people in the room. That's bad. That's really bad. Moving on. Wait, sorry, Emma, did you have anything to add?
I mean, I used to apply to a lot of summer research positions, but I think the crucial thing is just getting that first one, which can kind of be a challenge. Really what I did was I looked at the list of professors in a certain department, once again, like where I wanted to be that summer, and I sent out a lot of emails. But in the email, I usually specified what interested me about their lab, as well as a little bit about me and how like my engineering like toolkit, I guess, applies to what they're doing, even if I don't have that relevant experience. So I really stress that. And I guess just becoming very comfortable with rejection, because like most professors did not respond. But surprisingly, like the position I got was with the professor that I thought I stood no chance at. So even if you think that a lab is like way beyond your reach, apply. Like you have no idea, you could get lucky.
It's just the same as co-op. It's just the same as like send 100 things into the abyss.
Yep. I mean, also from my experience looking at things, I know mine is not the relevant experience in this panel, but I must mansplain. There are a lot of department websites with job postings and things, so you can actively see what labs are needing extra hands. Can we talk a little bit about some of the sacrifices that you've had to make to reach your spot in the career right now? I think it's easy to talk only about the wonderful successes, which all three of you have plenty of. But what are some of the things that you had to give up on?
Well, you're definitely not going to make the amount of money you would be making if you went into industry right out of undergrad. I consider myself like pretty well funded, and I think that biomed is a field that has like a reasonable amount of funding, and you have that opportunity to look at NSERC as well as CIHR depending on your field. But I mean, my colleagues who graduated and went off are being paid real engineering dollars, whereas I'm being paid grad school dollars for several years. So that's like one particular piece to consider. I mean, it's years of your life where you're sort of not having the same income as you could. That being said, I'm pretty comfortable with where I am, and I'm pretty comfortable with the funding that I have. Yeah.
Speaking of the funding part, when a person asked about the financials in the perspective of an international student, are any of you international students by any chance? Okay. I'm sorry, questioner. I'm also an international student working on that PR. From what I understand, with the PR, if that is a route you want to take, it becomes a lot more affordable. Anyhow.
Yeah, I can throw some UBC numbers into the chat about PhD programs and what they cost, and I'll write that down.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
I can echo what Jeannie said about like I graduated 2 years ago now, I guess, and like my friends are all having real engineering dollars, as she put it, and so that's definitely one thing. You also probably are going to move a lot, or at least for grad school. I guess Jeannie didn't, but like it's pretty normal, especially if you want to go into academia, to get experience at different institutions, and so you're going to be moving away from your family and friends, and as exciting as it is, it's also kind of sad to not see them at family holidays. I'd say that's probably my major one at the moment.
To kind of echo on that, yeah, even with med, you kind of have a little bit of a lack of control over where you go, especially in the future, when it comes to med school, residency, that kind of thing. But I guess, like others have said as well, if you come out of an engineering program and you have a job, you're pretty well off. But when you go into a new degree, you're like a first year again. So there's pros and cons to everything, and I don't really think I sacrificed anything in my undergrad. I mean, sure, like I had to study, but like so did everyone else. So compared to my peers, I think that the main sacrifice is just where you want to go, and potentially just like how much money you have, whether that be for fun or like family, that kind of stuff.
Another question related to the getting in portion. How much does GPA matter in the applications, and also what other things matter?
Well, definitely the supervisor I had asked me about the class I failed. I would say I had pretty good grades coming out of undergrad. There was definitely a semester where you can see an A+, a fail, a C+, and a B, just all of them. We hit all of the numbers. And I had that conversation with my supervisor when he was looking at taking me on about what that was. And I had gone back and passed that course later on. I would say it's a conversation that within our lab, like that is discussed, but not necessarily like the be all end all. If you have like some experience showing that you have lots of good skills in this particular area, I think that would be weighted equally, but it depends a little bit on your field. There are some minimums to get into grad school, and those are like the UBC grad studies has some average minimums, which are institution-wide as well.
Yeah, I think it's pretty dependent on the supervisor. I like had pretty good grades coming out of undergrad, but I think they're also looking at like if you have research experience and if you can explain why your research experience is relevant. Like something that Emma said is like, maybe I'm not already in this field, but I have all of these skills that I've worked on, and like kind of showing that you're a well-rounded person. So I don't really know if it matters what extracurriculars you do, but if you are able to explain why those extracurriculars have given you a certain type of skill that will be transferable, that'll be great. And also like you need to like have a certain resume, I guess, to like get that first interview. But once you have that interview, you're like, a lot of what they're looking for is if you're able to communicate well, and if you can write well in your email, like spell check your emails, please. So I think that it's important to some people, but trying to make yourself a well-rounded candidate that can pitch why you're a good candidate is a more important thing.
I guess I can kind of speak to the med school GPA scare, but it definitely does carry a lot of weight in the medical school admissions process. And that's more so just to get your file reviewed because there's so many applications. So to kind of get your foot in the door, you have to meet those requirements. Each school does it differently. So like I did fairly well in my undergrad, but I knew that some schools looked at me more favorably than others. And there's no special weighting for engineering. Some people used to ask me that. No, they don't care that I did engineering. But on the topic of extracurriculars, that's actually like a huge component. So just showing interest in an area, it doesn't matter what that is. If you're interested in like volunteering, if you're interested in research, and kind of how you sell that in the admissions process, I think is really critical because there's so many people that do well in school, but that's how you differentiate yourself and kind of get further in the process.
That's excellent. Kind of having to assert yourself with two supervisors, and that kind of self-advocacy, that is so important in grad school because you are the person building your work. One of the attendees asked about the needing to get comfortable with rejection piece, saying that that's their biggest struggle with applying for grad school or entering this space. So what's that journey been like for you, all of you, including Emma? I'm sorry, you've been like in a corner since we're talking about research things, but what's been like this journey of knowing what you want, being comfortable with rejection, and also being comfortable advocating for yourself in those spaces?
I can speak a little to the rejection. So I think the first rejection definitely burns the most. But once you start getting used to that and you start realizing that like there's all these other qualified people that are also kind of facing the same problem as me, then you start to realize like, oh, it's not really like a fault within me that's causing this. And I think that that's also a big thing with like medical school because it's inevitable. Like no one gets into every medical school. A lot of people get in on their third year of applying, and just kind of taking that in stride and realizing that there are so many smart people out there that deserve a spot. Doesn't mean that you don't deserve a spot, but it just comes down to that, and to keep trying. Don't give up just because you don't get it once.
Maybe I'll take us in a little bit of a different direction. I think one of the things you have to get used to in grad school is also failure. Failure of your experiments, failure of your paper to get accepted, all sorts of things. And I think it really comes to what Emma was saying about persistence is like, okay, maybe this thing hasn't worked and a non-result is a result. Like knowing that this thing doesn't work is in fact a thing that you have learned. And it may or may not be publishable depending on if there is any novelty in that concept. But I think it comes down to like always taking a moment to reflect and taking that higher level perspective of like, is this failure affecting sort of the global thesis idea? Is it affecting the project? Is this something that we can move forward? Is it worth sort of pushing in the same direction, or is it worth trying a new approach? And that, for me, I always have to like talk that through with someone, and my lab mates are really good for that. But it's very like dependent on the situation.
Yeah, and I think just one thing that I'll say is a little bit of a different direction as well, but first of all, I agree with everything that Jeannie said. Like, you speak into my life all the time. But something that I also noticed is that I came from a chemical engineering background, and I'm now working with like theoretical physicists who do bioinformatics and basic biologists who like know every pathway that's a molecular biology pathway. And coming from like a degree where like I got good grades and I knew what I was talking about, and then you come here and you're like, I know nothing, like at all, ever. And that's a big shock. And you just kind of got to keep chugging along. And I feel like that's something that's hard to wrap your head around, but just like, you have to keep in mind like the big picture of like, I have different skills from my engineering background that are like contributing to like my new ideas or innovations. And like, you just gotta be a little bit easier on yourself and read a lot and just not be afraid when you have a whole list of Google questions beside you in a lab meeting all the time.
Thank you so much. There's a question specifically for Laura. It says, I read about your participation in Flow02 through your SBME introduction. I understand that it was an incredible time crunch with the need to work in a multidisciplinary team. What was that project like for you, and what did you learn from it?
So much. So just as a quick background, at the beginning of COVID, we were all really afraid that there was going to be a huge ventilator shortage because of the respiratory problems that come with COVID. And so there was this initiative put out by McGill University called the Code Life Challenge to create a low-cost, easily manufacturable ventilator. My internet's telling me I'm unstable. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Okay, cool. Sorry. And so this was just the beginning of COVID, like early March. And myself and like 8 other engineers, or 7 other engineers who are all at UBC, worked together for that time, mostly remotely, to create a ventilator. It's kind of like a augmentation system on current sleep apnea devices. Super cool time and like stressful when everyone else was like working from home and just kind of like taking those 2 weeks off. We were like pulling my first all-nighters and working with different people. There's definitely like a mechanical component of it, of like putting pieces together. You'd be surprised at how many times I've biked to like Home Depot in that time. But also just like working with like software engineers to create like custom software for it. And a life science student turned biomedical engineer turned business student who honestly drove our project. So I think that the biggest thing is knowing that, like, again, you don't need to know everything to be a valuable team member. And it's okay to like focus on one area, because I feel like a lot of us are like, we need to do everything or like know what's going on in all these different areas. But if you really are on a time crunch, you have to trust your team members that they're going to do that part so that you can focus on yours. And as a bigger picture thing, like I learned again that entrepreneurship is super cool and something that I want to pursue. But back to your question about like, how do you decide how to spend your time? If there's so many things to learn about, like I kind of realized that my research was dropping and that was something that I want to do for the rest of my career, and that this was a really cool thing that I think could be helpful in low resource settings, but it wasn't my life passion. And that's okay.
Those are tough choices. Wow. There's only 9 minutes left, and it breaks my heart because I want to talk to you forever. But with some closing remarks, I just want to leave you to speak to whatever you want to speak. So let me just say, put some optional questions, and you just pick whatever you want to talk about. So I guess one, you're an amazing all-women panel. If you want to talk a little bit about your experiences as women in this space, whether or not you face challenges about it and how you've worked through them. A different question, what is a day in the life like? Pre and post COVID, I guess, what's going to be a day in the life after a vaccine, hopefully. And another question, what is the work-life balance? Is it something that you struggle with? What's that like for you?
I can go first. So for a day in the life, I'm pretty much doing like a Zoom MD. I don't have anything in person. So I do a couple lectures that are live with a lot of like small group sessions where we solve cases, but then there's a lot of like pre-recorded things that I go through every day. I also practice like interviewing patients, that kind of thing. Post-COVID, I would probably be doing more observerships in the hospitals and learning more things like how to take a physical exam, getting more involved in research. But yeah, other than that, in terms of work-life balance for medical school, at least because I'm in my first year, it's not bad. Like it's like being an undergrad, but I do know that once you're done medical school, residency can kind of take over your life. It's a common complaint that a lot of people have, but once again, very temporary. And then you can go back to your pretty standard, like maybe 40, 50 hour work week in your career. So it's just a small time sacrifice for a while.
Maybe I'll hop on the work-life balance piece as well. I would say it is extremely variable as to like where you are in your PhD. So I'm a candidate, so I shouldn't be taking classes, but I'm taking 2 extra courses this year because they're very relevant to my research and they're just offered this year. But I would say like when I have been taking classes are just like regular school. And my supervisor has been pretty good when I was sort of taking the bulk of my coursework about not having huge research-based expectations. I would say for me, I like work to deadlines. So if I have a conference coming up or if I have a paper I want to submit, that is definitely sort of gonna really grind towards that deadline. But I also try and pick up a bunch of different things. I'm not someone who's here to sort of fixate and focus on one topic. So I have classes I'm TAing, I have classes I'm taking, I have sort of volunteering stuff, I have my research projects, which are all sort of various things, and I hop between them a lot. But I would also say that for the most part, I have taken far more weekends than I have ever taken as an undergrad. Like I generally try not to work on the weekends. Not happening this weekend because it's November and midterm things crash into me this time of year. But for the most part, I don't spend a lot of time working on evenings or weekends unless there's some particular crisis.
To be fair, you didn't take that many weekends in undergrad.
Yeah, just in comparison, much better.
I can come in and say the same thing. Like last year, I was taking a lot of classes, and that wasn't necessarily the case. But now this year, it's you make your own schedule, and I've just kind of decided to like take one log off the fire and like take some time on the weekend and really try to explore Vancouver. And yeah, a day in the life of me is I wake up pretty early and I'm on the rowing team for UBC. So I go row, and that's like my daily exercise and like time outside, see the sunrise, and then even with COVID, our lab's open now, so I'm usually in the lab doing like wet lab experiments. I kind of want to talk about the first thing you said, if that's okay, if we can shift a little bit, about women in engineering and just graduate school. And I'd love to know what Jeannie and Emma kind of feel about this as well. I honestly had never really considered it as much when I was in my undergrad, like didn't notice it, didn't like see if anything changed. And then in grad school, I just feel a little bit more because people are talking about your future in academia. And like for maybe those of you who don't know as much, it's really based on your publications and kind of like going and get international experience, which is like inherently more difficult if you're like having children and taking time off and like need to look after small children and have to do household chores and stuff like that. So I think that SBME or like the UBC biomed program has done a good job of trying to bring up some of these issues, but I think that it's definitely still a conversation. And yeah, Jeannie, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I can speak a little to it. I would say, so electrical engineering as my undergrad had, you know, a good 10 to 12% women. So crazy amounts of women in biomed. Generally quite a different experience. And I would say like UBC and most institutions are fairly progressive, but of course I'm also a white woman. That's another factor to take into account. I'm the easiest person to count towards a diversity piece, and that's not something that I forget. I would say in general, when I look at like the people in the room, I do often like just count, which is not necessarily a good thing, but it's sometimes a sense of the direction a conversation might take. In terms of like mat leave and pieces, I do think that that's something I spend a lot of time thinking about at sort of the broader tables that I sit. CAHR, I think, just let people defer awards for mat leave as of January 2020. Like that was not a thing before. So having kids in grad school is like another whole conversation to have, and not something that I've had personal experience with, but certainly some of my friends have had those conversations with me and thought about sort of childcare availability on campus and how you could live on a stipend, which is sort of $23K a year, and have kids. Those are all really complicated conversations and things to think about, and definitely things to do your research on in terms of what support the institution you'd be going to would have for that.
Cool that you're on all those boards. I want to learn more.
You could be on them too.
I guess to kind of chime in, because I am from bioengineering, I didn't really feel that divide as much. But a lot of my friends did notice, and they were like more in software engineering, those kinds of fields. So I think it depends, but once again, I think in research, it can be very different, also depending on the culture of the lab that you're in, even within medicine too. I've heard some cities are a lot more toxic than others. So it depends for the most part.
I would also just go back to that point about talking to grad students when you're talking to potential supervisors, because as a PhD student, you're really vulnerable. And you're stuck basically in a place, and that can be a really dangerous place to be in depending on the lab environment. It can be something which is you're the person who learned how to use this machine and no one else ever learned how to use this machine, and so you're kind of never allowed to graduate because you know how to use the machine. Or it can be all sorts of things. And so like talking to the people who are in the place where you want to be is a huge thing to just understand like what the situation is.
With that, we're going to have to close. Thank you so much for taking your time, for being here, for sharing your thoughts and advice. Everyone at home, we can't see you, but give them a round of applause, visual or sound, I don't know. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of this, and have a great conference, you guys.
Hi there. I just also wanted to chime in and also say thank you on behalf of CUBEC to all of our panelists for this panel. Thank you guys so much. And thank you so much for Julio for being an amazing moderator. We really appreciated it. Now I think we're going to be moving on to our closing remarks. And yeah, thank you for all the questions as well from the attendees. This was a very nice panel.